Hello there, and welcome back to Boardroom Insights. Alan O'Neill here. Today, I want to continue on the conversation that I had with René Carayol, MBE, last week. René is an expert on leadership. He travels all over the world advising CEOs and heads of state on their leadership style and how to get the most from their people. And there was so much he talked about that I want to touch back in on and give my take on a few of the things that he said. There were three major takeaways for me. One was that trust is the real currency of performance. Now, when you think about trust is a term that is often thrown around, that people just use the word trust in a flippant way. And, some might think that people need to trust them. Yep, that's easier said than done. Trust has got to be earned. And how do you earn trust? Well, you've got to show trust. You've got to be trusting. And there are three elements that will help you to think about this in a more clinical way, I guess, to help you become more trustworthy with your people. One is ability, the second is dependability, and the third is integrity. Let me give you some examples. Ability. So I remember a head of HR in a retail environment whose job was to develop HR plans, strategies, and all the things related to HR. But she was out on a visit to a store one day, and what she came upon was some levels of chaos around the rostering and how the rostering was being planned for the week. And the teams were going over budget, and it was causing a bit of friction between head office and the local store. But rather than just making more demands and rather than just having a go at the team, she actually got stuck into the rostering and helped the team and worked through how to build the roster and how to get the most, both from the organization's perspective, the needs of customers, and indeed to satisfy the employees and the mix of talent that was available to them and so on. That was an example of her showing true ability. So rather than just from her high horse in head office making demands and complaining when things weren't right, she got stuck in and worked through she proved her ability, but also she proved her leadership. The second element of trust is dependability. And what comes to mind for me here is many years ago, I was involved in a project called Aurora. And this was where Selfridges in the UK and Brown Thomas in Ireland, two sister companies, had decided to merge their back office operations. Here I'm talking about accounts payable, accounts receivable, IT, and some other functions. And it was a significant piece of work that took more than a year to develop and to drive through. And what always struck me was the dependability, the obvious dependability of the leader, a guy called Bernard Sheehy at the time, that it was such a complex project and there was so much detail, and he and his team were so disciplined and so all over this project that every Friday we had an update. And that was where we would update on what's working, what's behind target, what needs corrective action, and so on. And you could set your clock by this team that they were so dependable. The spreadsheets would be ready. Their knowledge of what's working and what's not working was completely on tap every single Friday without fail. And that is showing real dependability, that we knew then that no matter what happened, that come Friday, that the team would be ready there with their update. Because after all, the CEO would also want an update. And that critical meeting with the project team helped those of us who had to report to the CEO on the updates. So that dependability, again, I'm going to say, showed real leadership. The third element of trust is integrity. And integrity is that sense of doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And here I think of an example where a CEO that I was working with had developed a bonus scheme for the team. And as the year traveled on, it appeared that the bonus scheme was actually unfair. Now, there were rumblings about it at the start, but nevertheless, the bonus scheme was developed. But about halfway through the year, it was quite obvious that this was actually going to turn out to be very unfair. And the CEO reversed it. Now, that to me shows integrity. So rather than being bombastic because he came up with this idea and he wanted to drive it through to prove himself, he actually did reverse the plan. And that, again, is an example of trust. So to me, this concept of trust has a definition. So rather than just making glib statements that people need to trust you or you need to trust other people, we need to think about how to understand what are we saying when we say we want people to trust us. The second takeaway for me was leaders are found, not born. And René gave the example of Sally. Sally was the assistant to some government leader in Africa where she managed to get a better turnout at a meeting than he did. And that's because she knew the people and she knew how to cajole, she knew what was needed for each individual. And it reminded me of something that I do myself at workshops occasionally. So depending on the purpose of the workshop, if we're talking about leadership and so on, I have on occasion gone and deliberately upset the coffee station. Now, let me explain. While the team are inside doing whatever exercises, I would sneak out to the coffee area before coffee time and I'd upset the way it's laid out. I would separate the cups from the saucers, the cutlery. I'd put the milk in an awkward position. I'd do something to the coffee dispenser that wasn't right. And then stand back and watch when the team came out for coffee. And I can guarantee that almost in every situation, somebody in the team would recognize there was chaos and then just get in and change the layout to fix the problem, to make it more seamless and to make it more efficient. And that again is real leadership, because that person doesn't have to be a senior person. It just needs to be somebody who recognizes that there's an issue and rolls up their sleeves and addresses the problem. And we've got a duty as organizations, as leaders, we have a duty to look out for those kind of people, to spot them and then develop them. So don't just leave them in there in the masses and to fend for themselves. Those people have value. Those people are potentially groomed for stardom. And we have a role to spot them and then help them to develop themselves into even better leaders. The third takeaway for me was this notion of vulnerability, where leaders show vulnerability rather than arrogance. And this links right into my Leader Six Pack, where I talk about humility. Vulnerability is where leaders have no issue with acknowledging that they are having a difficulty. And René gave the example of the head of some retail chain at a business meeting where there was feedback from the floor that people weren't happy with some process. And she acknowledged that she got it wrong. In that case, she reversed the decision. Now, it's a bit similar to what we talked about a moment ago with integrity. But vulnerability is where leaders recognize that they can't be brilliant at everything. So what do? They seek counsel. They tell people, I don't mean they go and broadcast it to the world at large, but they have no problem letting their key people know that this is something that they're not maybe good at, or they need a bit of help with, or that they're a bit challenged on, or a bit concerned about. That vulnerability can endear them to their people and show a human side. And I think people would respond to that positively. And of course, that vulnerability, when it is evident, other people see that. And then they recognize that it's okay for them too to be vulnerable and to show their vulnerability and call out when they need help. And this leads me nicely into my 7 steps to profit. And let's look at where leadership links right in with my 7 steps. I'm going to remind you of the 7 steps. They are: number 1, having a clearly defined North Star, then culture, strategy, people, customer, proposition, and execution. So what role do leaders have at each level? Well, clearly, in developing the North Star in the first place, that is critical. So being very, very focused on the direction that the business is going in, but more importantly, then communicating that. Very often in some of the surveys that we do, where we do the Organization Health Index, we find that many organizations have a North Star, as in vision, mission, but then it's not being lived consistently. People can't quote it. Now, if they can't quote it, I don't mean literally verbatim, but if they can't quote it, at least directionally, well then most likely it's not being used in any meaningful way. Step number 2, culture. So leaders need to be role models for the culture that has been defined in the organization. Too many organizations haven't yet defined their culture, and even when they don't define it, there is one there anyway. But even if you don't have a defined culture, you as a leader need to show leadership in the way that you behave, because people learn more about what they catch from you rather than what they're taught by you. So role modeling the culture is critical. Step number 3 is strategy. Not just staying with budgets as your plans, but building a strategy around that. That's real leadership, where you're doing proper scanning of the environment, understanding what the world at large is like, and then building a plan that suits your business. And once again, I'm going to say communicating that out, especially through middle managers to the front line, and getting alignment around the senior team around that strategy. Step number 4 is people. And this is where leaders need to work on bringing their teams on board, winning hearts and minds, showing leadership around including their people, really encouraging engagement. That leads us to step number 5, which is customer. And leaders know that everything has got to happen around the customer. Customer sits at the heart of everything. Leaders, again, need to role model that as a way of working, as a way of living in this organization. Step number 6 is proposition. Well, that's kind of obvious. Proposition is all about determining what is your product, your service, what's your route to market, and how you go about that. Having leadership about quick and decisive decision making, critical thinking, making good decisions that are the right decisions for the business. That leads us to execution. And execution is where the rubber meets the road. That's the day-to-day practice of what you're doing. That's where you bring it all together. But I'm going to say, like I've said many times before, if you give sufficient attention to steps 1 to 6 as a leader, that then is going to improve the success rate, the effectiveness of your execution. I'm going to say back to René, thank you for your words of wisdom, but I was also keen to extend his points and link them in with my 7 steps to profit because they are a perfect fit. That's it from me. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Have a great day. Most businesses aren't failing because of bad ideas. They're stuck because great ideas aren't landing for them. The culture says one thing, the strategy says another, and the customer is caught in the middle. That's why I created the 7 Steps to Profit, a practical business framework to solve that. It's not another off-the-shelf solution. It's a proven transformation framework that joins the dots across culture, strategy, leadership, customer, and execution, with the tools and structure to make it stick. Our support is also enhanced by our own organizational health assessment to give you clarity on what you need to work on. If you're ready for real alignment, measurable progress, and execution discipline, visit 7stepstoprofit.com. That's the number 7. 7stepstoprofit.com and book your no strings discovery call.